Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Kidney Coach YouTube channel. I'm naturopathic Dr. Fiona Chin, co-founder of Kygenesis and the Kidney Disease Solution. And I'm joined again today by the amazing Dr. Ian Lake. Dr. Ian Lake is a certified practitioner over in the UK who actually has been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes himself and is an absolute pioneer when it comes to alternative ways to manage type 1 diabetes without having to be so reliant on insulin, and really improving the long-term outcomes of people diagnosed with diabetes by altering their diet to something called a ketogenic diet. And he's an amazing pioneer with it all, and really is living proof of what is possible. And I'm always grateful for your knowledge and your time, Dr. Lake. So welcome, and thank you again for joining me.
Well, thank you for that generous introduction. It's to really what is just a survival kicking in, survival instinct kicking in, trying to maximize my chances, really. But I think keto diet for me, and certainly type 1 diabetes, makes absolute sense, and that's why I do it and try to provide the information. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and look, if you haven't listened to Dr. Lake's previous interview with us, he goes right through the ketogenic diet, how it was such a huge turning point for him and how it's really improved outcomes. And I know he's got lots of studies and things coming out, and we're going to have him back on when we're getting these amazing survey results back. But today we were going to dive into, because you're nice and fit and physically active, and we wanted to really talk about stacking exercise alongside a ketogenic diet and how that has really additional benefits from just putting in place a ketogenic diet, which is already beneficial in itself. So do you want to walk us through that and talk about how putting ketogenic diet, and you might want to just recap that really quickly, alongside exercise is something that, and what you're seeing in patients, and why that might be a really amazing combination protocol for people to do diagnosed with type 1, and I would suggest type 2 diabetes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so thank you. So I'm not a sportsman as such, but I do a lot of outdoor activities. But I've done, before I became type 1, I did a lot of cycling, sort of non-competitive sort of cycling. And I used to take up sort of jogging type of running, sort of, 3 miles, 5 miles sort of level. And just to give you my level, when I was at school, we had about 120 people in our year in secondary school. And I used to come about 20th, 30th in the annual cross country, never improved on that. So, average, nothing special. But I thought after my diagnosis of type 1 age in my 30s, mid 30s anyway, I can't remember the exact age, but I thought that I would trade off relatively poor control or good enough control of my sugar with physical activity. So I thought, well, if I do high, a lot of more physical activity, sort of running 3 days a week, that sort of thing, I'm probably avoid complications of type 1. And that's not the case. I think you can probably improve your overall, you can probably improve a little bit, but it's the glucose control that's going to get you in the end. And but having a healthy cardiovascular system is probably helping in some way. But that process tended to lead to certainly later years, after about 20 years of type 1, nothing really happened in that transition, in that sort of time between 0 and 20 years. It was just trying to manage your blood glucose around your insulin injections. So I used to do about 1 half marathon a year, and I used to tend to try my best. I sort of loaded up with porridge just so I could get the energy to do the physical activity as you do, and inject the insulin. And most of the time you had a high blood glucose on starting, about 16, multiply that by 18 if you're milligrams per deciliter, and then it would probably stay high or probably plummet, depending on how well you were doing. And inevitably, sort of towards the latter years, I was starting to get injuries, and I was then in my sort of 30s anyway, so you probably expect it. But it was more, and the thing about it was the injuries were, I think, happening because high blood sugar levels don't just affect your HbA1c. We can measure the HbA1c because we can get at the blood So we can measure the sugar sticking to the red blood cells, the hemoglobin HB, and measure the protein sticking onto one of the A1 chains of the hemoglobin, HbA1c. But after I had diabetes for about 20 years, so in my 50s then I was starting to get injuries. And I think that was because the sugar was sticking on to the muscles and the tendons as well. So recovery times were long. You know, if you'd gone for a long run, say 10 miles or something, you'd probably take a couple of days to settle down after that. If you did the half, you were hobbling for the next day, you know what I mean? And I didn't go keto because of that, but I noticed that performance was generally becoming more difficult to regulate, really, and to control. And after keto, the revelation was that when you're not taking much insulin, you get good blood glucose throughout the whole of your running experience or whatever physical activity you choose to do. If you're doing something like football or rugby or something like that, you're getting these sudden surges of running, and then you're doing a bit of jogging, then you're probably doing a bit of standing around, and you might have different blood sugar profiles, but you're only operating for 40 minutes at a time, and you can crack them pretty quickly in the half-time break. So they're not that much of an issue, really, if you're at an amateur level. But with their anaerobic exercises, sprinting type exercises, a lot of people get higher blood sugars. And in the distance stuff, you tend, if you've got too much insulin on board, which you tend to have when you have type 1 diabetes, you tend to run into hypo situations over the hour, 2 hours, that sort of level. And then you'll need to correct that with blood glucose, hopefully before you go massively hypo. And then, of course, your performance is affected and you take 20 minutes extra to recover from the hypo properly and blah, 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 blah. So it's quite an unsatisfactory experience. So a lot of people have their own specific regimen for managing type 1 and they stick with it because it works for them. So and good for them, at least they're engaging in sport. And a lot of people are put off engaging in sport because of these considerable issues around hypos and recovery times, I think. So my journey through sport really was that when I went keto, after about a year, I thought, well, I'll do a 1/2 marathon a month. That was, for me, that was quite a big deal. Okay. Doesn't seem much, but that was a big deal for me. And it took me 4 goes at the half marathon to realize. So I started off with fueling up with fatty foods like bacon and eggs or something like that, just to fuel up. And then it was bulletproof coffees, coffee with butter and stuff in it. And coconut oil and stuff like that. And then on the 4th one, I finally dawned on me, so, well, why do I need to ingest this fat when it's all there in my body, ready to go? And that was those light bulb moments. I thought, well, how silly. You don't actually eat before you do physical activity. If you're keto, why are you eating? You're a slow runner, you're a slow cyclist, you're a slow everything. Nothing's going to happen to you if you just let your body burn its fat naturally. So that was a revelation. Ever since then, that was about 5 years ago now, nearly all of my sport is done fasted. Because that's how I prefer to do it. But the interesting thing is, we talked about the 0, 5, 100 before, running 100 miles in 5 days with no food. That was interesting because none of us had any issues with recovery. There was not one ache amongst any of us. I think one person had a bit of a knee twinge, and somebody had a blister on their ankle or something. But beyond that, nobody had any recovery issues at all, which was insightful, wasn't it? And then last year or early this year, I did a 150-mile run along the canals of Britain from London to Birmingham. It's 150 miles. And I did it solo. And I used a keto diet, but it was 2 meals a day. And the interesting thing is, the last 2 days I did sort of longer distances, like ultramarathon type of distances, and I had no issues with recovery whatsoever. So I think once you're on keto, it seems to protect you a little bit against tendon and muscle injury, and I think that's a common finding amongst a lot of people.
Well, it makes sense, right? Because you're not getting those inflammatory
Yeah,
markers as much from these big insulin surges and spikes, I guess. So
I think
it
that's
does,
right.
yeah. Yeah, fascinating. So have you found, since you've increased your exercise and really got that for you, that pattern of what to eat, and actually for you what not to eat before you exercise and everything, have you noticed that being more active and being able to really manage that really well along with ketogenic diet, has that improved your insulin sensitivity? Has it led you to be able to reduce your insulin units? Tell me more about that part of it.
Yeah, so that's worth talking about. Absolutely. I've done a lot of cardiovascular type of activities throughout my life, and I've not really liked the muscle training sort of stuff, the muscle building. But
Yep.
as time's gone on, and with the increase in knowledge of how important it is to have a way of moving glucose out of the blood and not rely on your liver to do it. So you have two mechanisms here, two effective mechanisms. So if your blood glucose is high, why is it high? Is it you've got not enough insulin? Mostly not, but occasionally. So if it's high, your insulin can bring your blood glucose down in two ways. It can send the glucose to the liver and convert it into fat, or it can send the glucose into the muscle. It augments the glucose getting into the muscle, because the glucose will get there anyway, but it speeds it up rapidly and burn the muscle off. But of course, it'll only do that when the muscle's working. So if I'm just sitting here now and got a high blood glucose, there's no point. I could go for a run, yeah, absolutely. But most people would inject insulin to encourage the liver to work a bit harder, if you see what I mean. But it doesn't necessarily work, because often the liver is working max. And if your blood glucose is still high, you can't just keep injecting insulin, certainly if you've got insulin resistance. So the only other option is to have big muscles where the insulin can stick onto the muscles if you're moving them. And you only got to do some gardening or go for a walk or something for half an hour or something, and you'll find the insulin will stick into the muscle and hoover the glucose out of the bloodstream for you. So having larger muscles, building your muscle mass up, I think provides a second way of managing blood glucose in type 1 diabetes. And I'm pretty well convinced now that having an active lifestyle, certainly with some weight training built in, or walking up and down stairs, is pretty good. Elastic band sort of type of thing. If you have existing injuries, because it shouldn't be exclusive to people who just fully limbed and have no injuries. So there are other exercises you can do to build up muscle strength in any of your muscles. Your core muscles are the biggest ones, and that'll probably give you the best benefit if you can exercise them. But I'm convinced that is a fantastic way of managing blood glucose on top of just controlling the sort of food you eat. And yes, if you've got good blood glucose, you get less glucose sticking onto all the tissues. So these advanced glycated end products that we call them, that are associated with aging and associated with decay of tissues. And of course, the high levels of insulin that are required to cover high levels of carbs before keto. Of course, insulin is a pro-inflammatory hormone, so it will lead to chronic inflammation, and that by itself will lead to tissue damage as well. So physical activity, I see it now as certainly muscular physical activity and cardiovascular is very, very good for the brain. A lot of people, when they do running or long cycling, get a lot of meditation time, and it does help them a lot. But building up muscles using muscles is a good way of hoovering up sugar out of the bloodstream, especially if your blood glucose is stubbornly high. Great way of doing it. And being active does improve your insulin sensitivity as well. I think it's just because you use insulin in a different way.
Yeah, fascinating. And I think, as we were talking in a previous podcast, getting your HbA1c into those really normal levels, which is what you're seeing when people are going ketogenic, right? They're getting their HbA1c out of a diabetic range into a normal range. Making that insulin more sticky, and then adding exercise and all the other benefits that we know that exercise does. And we definitely know having more muscle mass is going to slow your aging down, but it's so protective against all the comorbidities that come with type 1 diabetes, such as kidney disease and, peripheral neuropathy and, glaucoma and eyesight changes and all those sort of things. So I just think, as you and I probably both would say, prevention is always better than cure. So why wouldn't you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And any more plans for half ultra marathons or anything coming up for you?
At the moment, no, it's roughly, I have a sort of every 2 years. So this year I've done my 150 miles. So another year, give it another year and I'll start to become sort of restless and something I'll have to have. Who knows?
Perfect.
Anyway, it's a bit of fun. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's good. And, we've banged on before about the huge benefits of exercise, not just in kidney disease, but if you've got cardiovascular disease, diabetes, all of those sort of things. And like you say, it only has to be gardening or going up some stairs. You're not talking about everybody having to go run half ultra marathons. It's just moving. They are saying sitting's the new smoking, aren't they? And it is, so many people do that. Is there anything else you want to add about exercise and its benefits? Anything else we haven't covered that you think is necessary?
The only thing I'd say is to anyone who can't even contemplate exercise, just start small, but make it part of every single day. And then eventually, I think most people come to this phase where they miss it if they're not doing it. And that's the thing, is starting to understand it as part of life, of sensitizing your whole body to improve metabolism. I think you get a metabolic advantage with physical activity over and above the advantage you get from adopting a healthier ketogenic type of diet. I think that adds to that.
Yeah,
it's not an option. I don't think it's an optional extra in type 1. That's what I think I should say. But there are people who physically just cannot do exercise, but doing what you can. It's surprising with an imaginative physio how you can actually do certain training to move your muscles around a little bit, and your joints around, of course, as well. Posture training, yoga, Pilates, they're all excellent ways of controlling your body, and that helps your muscles to work in the right way. And if your muscles are all tuned up, you just get less injuries. If your back's strong and your core's strong, your back can hold up your spine much more effectively, just because the muscles are tuned up, really.
Yeah, I think it's a really good
etc. etc. You're an expert on that anyway.
No, but it's good for people to hear.
More expert than I'll ever be on sports. So.
No, it's everything that you just said, I think is really important. And I just, to reiterate that getting your HbA1c and just getting that right down, and which means you can get your units of insulin right down. And like we say, the potential of that to prevent things like kidney disease, diabetic neuropathy, all of those sort of things, which I just think is invaluable. And I've mentioned this in another recording we did that's not on YouTube, but imagine if we put in ketogenic diets and exercise were prescription for anyone diagnosed right off the bat, whether we could hold them in that honeymoon phase, and have them not have to use insulin for the rest of their life. And I know you talked about a child in Hungary that's, and I know it's an N of 1, but they've been in honeymoon phase for 6 years? Yeah. That's
on the internet. That's Paleomedicina, the company that have done that. Paleomedicina. Yeah. But as you say, it's n equals 1, but you should never ignore n equals 1s. It's the black swan thing, isn't it? If you all believe all swans are white and black swans don't exist, then you see one. Well, your statement that all swans are white is no longer valid.
Exactly.
So we have to be flexible in our thinking, I think, as scientists.
Yes, no, I 100% agree with that. And I'm very interested to see where in the coming years where ketogenic diets go, because I just think they have got so much therapeutic use, and not just type 1 diabetes. We're seeing it with polycystic kidney disease, which has exactly the same mechanism as cancer, mind you. It's that upregulation of the mTOR pathway, which is again this aging. And so, the effects of ketogenic diets are far-reaching, and I would say it's probably what our ancestors were ketogenic adaptive. That's probably how they or were, and I suspect it is our natural pathways to have a more fat abundant diet versus these highly processed sugars, which since they've come into our diets, we've seen all these chronic diseases really bloom. So I can't think that that's a coincidence. So
I think you're right. And the other thing about type 1, of course, is if you get the control, the basal control right with the keto diet, you can then choose when you eat, and you can probably choose how you influence the mTOR pathway with the autophagy and all that. That's obviously something you're more expert in than me, but having the flexibility on when you eat as a type 1 gives you other options to improve your potential.
100%. And just not being tied to a pump and, having to check your blood sugar every day, just the freedom that comes with that. It's the same if we can reverse people off dialysis and things like that. It just gives you another sense of freedom and autonomy, as you mentioned. So I think it's really interesting research. And I know you're doing more and more research, and you're about to write a course, and this is what I really wanted to share with people. You're about to launch your course in teaching the general public how to implement a ketogenic diet in type 1 diabetes. I know you've already got that written for healthcare professionals. Do you want to tell everybody a little bit more about that? And of course, I'll put the details down below for anyone that's interested.
Thank you. So I've been quite keen that healthcare professionals get access to the information that is written in from a type 1 perspective rather than academic perspective. So they can get practical information with all of the CGMs. I've published a lot of continuous glucose meter graphs and, with questions and workbook type material. But it's always been my belief that people with type 1 diabetes should have equal knowledge to their specialists within the diabetes realm. Now, being a medical doctor is more than just knowing one subject, and you have to be alert to other possibilities. But when you have type 1, you manage it 24 hours a day for 365 days a year, minus your 1 hour you get with your specialist a year, or obviously more if you're struggling with your control. But by and large, someone with type 1 is managing it all the time. And keto lifestyle is embarrassingly easy. Once people get it half an hour and they've sort of got it, and then there's the learning curve as to how to improve it for them, and everyone's slightly different. So there are 400,000 people in the UK with type 1, and there are 400,000 ways of managing it. If you're a child compared to an adult, compared with someone who has other medical conditions on top of your type 1 diabetes, which unfortunately you're allowed other diseases as well as type 1. You will have different insulin requirements. If you're a sports person, have a sedentary life, you'll have different ways of managing your type 1. But I think it's not a difficult thing to learn. And I think if people become expert in understanding insulin, that's the key thing. And it's understanding how your body works. So within this course, it's replicating the professional courses. There's an essential course and an advanced course. And it's replicating those in the style that people who aren't used to the medical language would understand. So it's not dumbing it down, it's just reinterpreting what I've already written in a form that people who don't have those technical, to read a medical text, it's an art form. It's the same as me reading a legal text. I wouldn't have a clue what they're on about. And then I'd ask somebody, can you just tell me that in English? And so I'm hoping to rewrite the whole of professional courses so people with type 1, if they wish, can learn their type 1 to a clinical standard. And I think for some that will be rewarding. For others, they will just want the essential type 1 that says, tell me what to do, tell me what to eat, I'll get on with it. That's absolutely great. But if we can get that information across, just that people understand what a keto diet is, then they've got the power as to whether they choose to use that information or not. And if they say, no, I've looked at it and I don't want it, great, you've looked at it, thank you very much. You can choose your lifestyle. It's not for me to tell you what lifestyle to do, but it is, I think, for me to inform you that there are other alternatives to what you're doing at the moment. So that's what the course is all about. It's coming out in the autumn, hopefully, when I can sit down and get it done. Yeah.
Well, I'll put the details below. And what you said's perfect. It's exactly what we try and do here at Kidney Coach. It's the same thing. It's, the thing is, there's nothing you can do. You'll end up on dialysis. You'll need a transplant. And it's funny, we've got our Facebook ads that go out and people are like, you can't reverse kidney disease. It's like, you can. Take a look at our, testimonials. We've got people there that have gone back 1 to 2 stages of their disease. We've got now, this is not something that I actually thought we'd see. We've got people that have been on dialysis for 2 years coming off. All the stuff that we were told was impossible is now no longer impossible. And like you said, it's like the white swan, black swan. If it's there, you need to pay attention, and we need to look at what these people are doing. And it's not just luck. The numbers are so big now, right? So it's, as you said, it's looking at all of this stuff, and hopefully people living with the disease like yourself or anyone out there with kidney disease, they know it better than anyone. They're living it 24/7. And when their knowledge is, they've got the same clinical understanding as their nephrologists or their endocrinologists, it is a game changer, and it makes you more empowered in your decisions. And I know for me, with my own autoimmune disease, because of my medical training, it's been a much more empowered journey, because I can say no to things that don't make logical sense to me, and say, I take medications that nobody else uses for MS and things like that, because I've got medical trial. I can go, well, this makes sense. They've got clinical trials on it. There's no side effects. This makes more sense to use it this way. My doctor can't argue with me. So it's like, okay, let's try it. So I just think that empowerment for people is just so important. And it's the people that will change potentially how things like ketogenic diets are implemented, and hopefully earlier when people have that knowledge. So I think what you're doing is fantastic and needed.
Thank you. The other thing is that we're empowering the patient, but strangely, we're empowering the clinician as well. If they understand the keto diet and are happy to deliver it to a high standard, they will have the benefit of the experience of seeing hundreds of people. Whereas me as a type 1 living on my own sort of thing, you know what I mean? Me as the type 1 who only knows me as a type 1 has got a limited experience. So I can go with an issue and in a collaborative way say, what do you think to that? And the consultant will say, well, I've seen 3 or 4 people like that, and they've done this. So we're not disempowering our healthcare professionals who we're enabling them to form a very positive collaboration with their patients or people living with type 1. And the only thing, you're getting competitive as well, because you're talking about coming off dialysis. We'll never come off insulin as far as we know.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Yeah, like you say, if we can, maybe we can prevent going on insulin.
We can improve the situation a lot.
Yeah, like you say. Sorry, I didn't mean it that way, but yeah, no. If you,
I know you didn't. I took it that way.
If you have that like I say, that child with the honeymoon phase, I just think that
it's possible.
It's possible. It's possible. That's right. It's one case, but we now know it's possible if you get that in the honeymoon stage. And that, I think, alone should spark up every physician's ears to go, what's possible, and let's have a look at that. How exciting. And I agree with you. It's, a collaboration, that kind of relationship with your specialist is what it should be. It should be a collaboration. It should be 2 people on this journey together. This is what I'd like to do. I'd like to do a ketogenic diet. Are you on board in supporting me in doing that? Here's why I want to do it. This is the information I've found. If you've not heard about it, go and look at Dr. Lake's website, but maybe you could have a look at that information and, walk that with me. So I think that's a great way of doing it. And the more, like you say, the more physicians that see people transitioning and being able to explain why in an articulate way, which is what they get from your course, I think also empowers clinicians to go, okay, well, this patient's articulating this in a way that does make common sense. Maybe I need to look at this, which is great too.
Let's hope so. Let's hope we can provide that information. And we're both doing it for 2 different conditions, which is fantastic.
Yeah. I know, who knows how the world will be in another 10 to 15 years, but I think there's some exciting stuff coming. And, diet is a simple thing. It's something everyone has control over, what they put in their mouth. And if it can do all the amazing things that we're seeing it do with type 1 diabetes, why wouldn't you at least have a go of it, right? Absolutely,
100%.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Lake, I really want to thank you for your time, your expertise, and your passion in the subject. I know it's, like you say, it's different when you have it yourself because you've got an invested interest, but I think also maybe that's the hidden blessing in having conditions like this, is that you can pioneer the way for other people to really have a better life, that using less insulin and things like that. So I think it's a sacrifice that you've taken to a noble cause, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fiona. It's very kind of you.
Yeah, and I'll put Dr. Lake's details below. So if you want to know about his course, like I said, it's coming out in the fall, which will be in a couple of months, but we'll put the details below. He already has the course there for healthcare practitioners. So if you're a healthcare practitioner wanting to know how to better support your patients with type 1 diabetes, then go and have a look at that. The training is excellent and really top level, and really will give you the whole scope of how to implement ketogenic diets into people with type 1 diabetes, of why you should do it and the science behind it. So have a look at that. If you want to talk or consult with Dr. Ian Lake, I know he does 3 30-minute sessions, which is very generous of him just to get people set up. So I'll put the details below there as well. If you want to know more about what we do, head to www.kidneycoach.com. You'll find us on Facebook under the same / and Instagram. And yeah, I think that's everything. Remember to hit subscribe and like. That way you'll get notified anytime we put out more information. Again, Dr. Lake, thank you again for being you and pioneering the way. And I can't wait to hear about the results of some of your surveys and other bits and pieces that are coming down the pipeline. We will definitely catch up with you when that information is back, because I think that's going to be a really interesting conversation. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for being part of our community. We'll see you next time. Bye.